Good morning, everyone. My name is Sarah Duffy, and I will be your MC for today. So great to have you. Obviously, some people it's their morning, some people it's their afternoon, and some people it's their evening. So welcome to the ASTN Masterclass. It's so great to have you. Today's session will be recorded and will be available on the ASTN website in the coming days. Obviously, today's ASTN CDH Open Innovation Masterclass is going to be a wonderful day. First, though, I would like to acknowledge the traditional custodians and owners of the land on which we meet today and pay my respects to elders past, present and emerging. I extend that respect to Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islanders peoples here today. As you can see on the screen now is our agenda for today. First, we'll have a keynote from Henry this morning. You will be able to ask questions after Henry has finished speaking, so please add any of those questions to the chat screen, and I will voice those questions to Henry, and he will be able to answer those for you. Straight after, we will have a panel discussion, which will be hosted by Martin and Henry with some very special guests, obviously followed by a Q&A as well. We'll have a short comfort break, and then we will also have an introduction to the Open Innovation Challenge from Martin. After that, we'll have a fireside chat hosted once again by Henry and Martin, and have some special guests, followed by another Q&A before we finish up around 2 p.m. this afternoon. I would like to now warmly welcome our first keynote speaker. Henry is Faculty Director of the Garwood Centre for Corporate Innovation within the Institute of Business Innovation at the Haas School of Business at UC Berkeley. His research focuses on managing technology and innovation. He is known as the father of open innovation due to his book, Open Innovation. Scientific American magazine named him one of the top 50 technology and business leaders in recognition of his research on industrial innovation. Prior to embarking on an academic career, he spent 10 years in various product planning and strategic marketing positions in Silicon Valley companies. He worked for 7 of those years at Quantum Corporation, a leading hard disk drive manufacturer and a Fortune 500 company. Please welcome Henry.
Oh, thank you very much. It's a pleasure to be with you all. I'm going to share my screen and jump into my presentation so we have more time for the Q&A. So let's see if this is working properly. Are you seeing my screen? Okay, so is that working? I'm not hearing any feedback. So is that okay, everyone?
Yes, that's fine.
That's fine.
Thank you very much. The feedback helps a lot. So let's set the table for our meeting today by first going over open innovation as a concept. Then I will give you some background and intuition and some examples, and then we'll move toward our first panel. So to just explain the concept in brief, it is a distributed innovation process involving knowledge flows across organizational boundaries for pecuniary and non-pecuniary reasons. So a lot of words, but the key concepts I've underlined. Distributed means it's not simply top-down, but instead it is distributed across several places. And also the knowledge does not simply operate inside a single organization, but instead flows across organizational boundaries. And this happens purposively, meaning people do this intentionally, and they are sharing knowledge with one another in the innovation process. Why might you care about this? Let me give you 2 brief reasons why you might care. One is when I first wrote this book back in 2003, I did a Google search using open innovation as a search term, and I got back a couple of hundred links. And what had happened at that time was the phrase open and the phrase innovation had appeared next to each other in a press release on Business Wire or something like this. So if a company opened an innovation office, that would be represented in the 200 or so results. When I did the same search using the same search term on the same Google search platform for this presentation, I got more than 890 million links. So this has clearly exploded, and now open innovation has become a thing. And it is not only a concept out on the internet. For all of you who are active on LinkedIn, you can try this yourself. You can go on the page, search on the connections. I think I've got a slide on that. And so you can see in LinkedIn at the top, here's your search bar. You can search here on people or companies or jobs and see what comes back. And so in this case, I got 615,000 results where people that are first, second, or third degree connections in my network had open innovation somewhere in their profile. So these are two reasons why you might care about this. And if we think about, well, how do you do it? What are the practices that one might use if you're actually trying to take advantage of this distributed model of innovation involving knowledge flows across organizational boundaries? You might think of using open source software or crowdsourcing, and we'll have an example of that from one of the challenges later today. Licensing intellectual property, or working with universities or startups or venture capitalists or suppliers. All of these can be thought of as part of open innovation because each of them involve knowledge flows across organizational boundaries. So I hope this gives you some sense of what's going on here. To give you some sense of the change that open innovation reflects, I'm going to start with a stylized representation of an organization's innovation process. And you see it shown here as a funnel turned on its side. And each of those little squares you see in this funnel can be thought of as a project in the company's innovation system. And you notice first that the funnel begins and it's quite wide. And that signifies the idea that we consider many possibilities initially in the innovation process, but the funnel then narrows down to a much smaller space, and that reflects the selecting and filtering that goes on. So we start many more things than we finish in this innovation process. And it tends to move from a science and technology base of the organization on our left, and it moves through to the marketplace on the right. And organizationally, in particularly companies of a certain size, there is some specialization where the initial group might be a research group, but then the subsequent development and release to the market happen in the development groups, maybe the product groups, and eventually the sales and marketing organization. And I call this a closed innovation system because in this representation, there's one way into the innovation process, which is from your own knowledge, your own science base, and there's only one way out, which is through your own channels to your own market. Open innovation actually changes this approach. We start with our funnel, as I said before, aimed at our current market, but with open innovation, we actually open up the funnel, as shown here by drilling holes in the funnel. And with that, we can not only address our current market, we can now potentially address other markets, as well as our own core market. So this means we have many different pathways in the innovation journey. The first pathway is the one I was sharing on the previous slide, where something goes from inside our own knowledge base through our innovation process to our own market. That's still a perfectly valid way to innovate, but now it's only one path in a more general process. You can have things go to the outside, to other markets. You can have things go from the outside into our organization. And maybe we join that up with something we've got internally, and that allows us to go after a new market. Or we could bring in external technology and take that to our current marketplace. You can even have the so-called boomerang, since we're talking here in Australia, where a project starts inside, might go outside for some period of time, and then come back in again. In general, you can think of two kinds of knowledge flows. The first from the outside into our organization for our business, that's the outside in. The second is from our inside going out to other markets. That's the inside out. To give you a sense of the embrace of open innovation, I want to cite a letter that was written by a pharmaceutical company called Merck to its own shareholders. And Merck, in a way, is explaining to its investors its own transition to a more open innovation model. Merck does a lot of scientific research, but it might amount to about 1% of what's being done in the whole world. And for Merck to succeed, they've got to somehow access this other 99%. So that gives you a sense of why it's so important to open up. Another way to think of this is from Bill Joy, who is well known in the tech community here in Silicon Valley. He actually says not all of the smart people work for you. So yeah, there are a lot of smart people in the world, and you need smart people in your organization, but part of their job is to identify and connect and then leverage the other even more smart people that don't work for you. So that's some intuition about this idea of open innovation. I'm going to give you an example from the Netherlands, a company that many of you know well, Philips, longtime electronics manufacturer, these days really focused on healthcare, and they recently spun off their lighting business as well. So what you're seeing here is a picture from the early 2000s, where on the campus that they had in Eindhoven in the Netherlands, they had about 1,500 scientists, researchers, and engineers developing products and technologies for Philips use. And they realized around the time of my book, and they actually give me some credit for this, that it would be more effective to tear down the fencing around the perimeter of this 1,500 person research center, and instead create a whole hotspot for Central Northern Europe, where now there are more than 7,000 people working on what is now known as the high-tech campus. So it's no longer specific to Philips. It involves dozens and dozens of companies, all working in the same physical footprint of the previous earlier internal R&D facility. And you can see that amongst the companies that are represented in this physical space, there are other corporations, some of whom spun out of Philips. There are other research institutes that supply new technology and science to the process. There are consulting and service organizations that support it, and even funding organizations that are looking for the next new thing. All of them are now co-located in the same physical space. And what this does for Philips is, in that, similar to that earlier funnel diagram I was showing to you, it really opens things up. It allows Philips to get to new markets that it wouldn't get to otherwise. It also allows Philips to bring in new knowledge from the outside that previously it wasn't as able to access. And then to do this, Philips needs to develop a number of new tools and methods to manage innovation inside the organization. I won't go through all of these here, but I've highlighted a few I would like to discuss. One are these co-creation platforms, where they put knowledge and technologies and opportunities out on the web to try to engage with outsiders and say, here are things we are looking to accomplish. Can you help us? Another is their supplier roadshow down here at the bottom, where they actually go to their suppliers and say, what should we be doing with you? What are things that you're doing with others that we might benefit from? And then they have an intermediary called 9 Sigma or Your Encore. And these are organizations that take challenge briefs from Philips and then seek out potential collaboration partners. So at the core of Philips, you see they still have their core businesses, and surrounding the core businesses, they have a number of traditional functions that operate as they did before. But what's really new is this outer layer, where now it's much more out in the ecosystem, it's much more connected to other parties, and it enriches the flow of knowledge that Philips has access to doing. So that's an example of the change from the corporate perspective. There's also the startup perspective. And the startup working with corporates in open innovation, you can see a lot of the possibilities because startups have energy, they have focus, they can get a lot done in a short period of time, but startups also have limitations and they have fears. When they're working with large corporations, the first fear most startups have is they're going to steal my idea. So I can't tell them what I really want to do or what I'm working on because they'll take it. And they have a lot more lawyers than we do. So you have to work through those challenges to be able to start an effective collaboration. And usually companies that see the opportunity and the benefit of collaborating get through that. It takes some time, but they do get past that. Then they hit a second later barrier. And this barrier is harder, quite honestly. And that is that large company takes so long to make a decision. You know, we're ready to go. We've got the data. Here are the results. We see the opportunity. We've got a list of people and companies to go reach out to, and we can't get authorization to start. And the root of this problem is that the large company is using the processes it has developed to review major decisions that involve big outlays of a lot of money, and rightly are reviewed carefully through many parts of the organization. That same process is sometimes used to respond to an opportunity with a startup that's going to be a very small amount of money, at least initially. And yet they're using this very cumbersome process to do that. So in working with companies and startups in this space, I have really come to the view that it's a good practice for larger companies to acknowledge that in the early going, these are going to be small decisions. So let's create a streamlined process to deal with rapidly the small decisions that need to get made at earlier stages. And then we'll come back to the larger committees and processes when bigger money is involved, but let's not do that at the outset. So to give you some visualization of this, there are those two information flows from the outside in that is going to really give you more ammunition to take to your customers, to your markets, and really strengthen your business model. And the inside out is actually a way to explore and test other markets and other business models. And this is, I think, one of the great values of the inside out branch is you get real customers with real money buying a real product or service. And that's the best validation you can get when you're trying to develop a new business model. So now let's move into sports. This is from a case study I did with some colleagues at ESADE, a business school in Barcelona. And although it isn't quite what it was when Messi was there, FC Barca is doing some very interesting things in innovation. And one of the things that I was fascinated by in researching this is, of course, we know the football team, but they actually have a number of both professional sports teams and amateur sports teams, all in this under this umbrella. And this actually gives them the ability to test and experiment in some of the peripheral organizations, and then take the best of that into the core businesses where the real money is. And so I think everybody is familiar with FC Barca. One of the things that has been a development in that facility and is documented in the case study is the increasing digitalization for the athletes in sport. And now there are a lot of things that can be tracked and measured, and you can see some of them here. We're going to see another one today. I think Martin is going to share with us another digital capability that is going to enable even more potential innovation here. But with all of this digital technology and all of the data that comes off of these devices, there are a lot of opportunities now, both on the field and off the field, to improve the performance and improve the audience. And in fact, that's what the thrust of this slide is about, that in the core areas, it's really about the performance of the athletes and how to help them be at their best when they're on the field. And there's a lot of work going on to support that. A new area for the Innovation Hub is actually going outside of the pitch to the audience, to the fans, to the realization that the impact of the organization starts long before the match begins in the stadium. And there are a lot of ways to engage and inform the fan base. And a lot of testing and experimentation is now going on here as well. And so how do they organize this? Well, of course, there's the whole club. And then they have the traditional business lines that they've had for a long time to support the mission of the team and the performance of the athletes. They are also realizing increasingly, particularly in this digital space, that there is a surrounding external ecosystem that influences the experience and expectations of the fans, of the athletes. It brings new possibilities to the organization. And so this external ecosystem itself has to be understood. And they are spending more time there. And really, in a sense, the surface area of the organization is expanding to admit and engage with these actors that are outside the traditional bounds of the organization. One example I wanted to focus on, because I think it will set up some of the work we're going to do together later this morning and into the afternoon, is this idea of using challenges to really galvanize the organization and in turn reach out to this external ecosystem for help. And one that the Barca team did with the insurance company Allianz is to challenge startups to come up with ideas to enhance sports performance. And so they had a process for startups to submit their briefs and proposals. They had an expert committee to review the proposals, and then they make the awards. And so the startups that win not only get the awards, but they get all the publicity that goes with that. And they've done this now a couple of times. This is the second year's winner, a company called Swayanti. I'm not sure if I'm saying that right, but basically it's an organization that analyzes the sweat of athletes and uses AI to make inferences about the hydration of those athletes, and not just overall fluids, but the composition of minerals and what might be, maybe they need more of this, maybe they should be having less of that. And it comes from analyzing the sweat, hence the name of the startup. So this was the contest winner for the second running of this competition that happened in March of this year. So I'm going to close with one that got away. I've shared this story with Martin, and he thought it might be amusing for you all as well. I'm based in California, And after the Sochi Olympics in 2016, I was approached by a member of the US, one of the staff members of the US Olympic Committee, to see if open innovation might help the performance of American athletes in the next Olympics. And I thought, fantastic, what a great opportunity to get involved with this and see if I can somehow help. And I learned that in Colorado, there is a sports research laboratory with, I think, 44 researchers and engineers, state-of-the-art facilities, pretty healthy budget. But the problem is there were more than 50 sports at the time going on in the Summer Olympics. And they had, with the 44 researchers, they could probably work on somewhere between 5 to 10 projects at a time. They had a limited capacity, and so the top sports would get most of the attention, and most of the sports would get no support from the lab because there just wasn't enough resources to do that. So my idea with open innovation was keep working with the lab, keep supporting the sports you can, but for every sports organization you can't support, put those needs out into the wider athletic research community. Most of the major universities around the United States have academic medical centers, excellent equipment, very, very strong researchers and scientists, and they might want to help. And you might even be able to tap some of the wealthy individuals out there. So in fencing, for example, Mark Zuckerberg, formerly of Facebook, now Meta, he was a big fencing person when he was in college. Maybe he would be willing to contribute money to support research to improve the performance of the American fencing team. So we have new sources of money, potentially, new research facilities we could tap using these open innovation processes, and the results could potentially enhance the performance of American athletes. So that was my pitch. But as I'm sharing with you, this is one that got away because the pitch was voted down. And I think there are some reasons for that, particularly if you remember back to Sochi, there was a lot of concern with doping of athletes. And that in turn meant that it became very important for each Olympic organization to really carefully understand what was going on with their athletes. And so the idea of distributing this research to a wider group of research facilities came at a time when people were trying to get more control over what was going on rather than distributing the research burden. So it wasn't the right time. I still think it's a good idea. It's still the case that most sports don't get much research support. And so as we think about what we might do in Australia, I thought I would share that experience with you as well. So here are some of the books that I've written about open innovation. There's another one coming early next year, the Oxford Handbook of Open Innovation, which is a great doorstop if anybody needs one. I really appreciate your attention and look forward to the Q&A and the rest of the program. So thanks very much. Sarah, back to you.
Thank you so much, Henry. Well, we have a couple of questions that have popped in already. So we'll start with Tim. What advice would you give to organisations looking to embrace open innovation for the first time? And are there common pitfalls to avoid?
Yes, absolutely there are pitfalls. And I have tried to paint a hopefully inspiring portrait of all the possibilities that can be realized. But I haven't really talked much about failures and when things can go wrong. So things can go wrong. So the first piece of advice I would say is to start smaller. Don't try to do it all up front at first. Take it in stages. I've mentioned, for example, the outside in and the inside out paths of knowledge flows. I think for most organizations, it's prudent to start with the outside in now set of knowledge flows and those practices, because you're still going after your same market, your same customers with your same business model. So those things really aren't being changed very much. What's changing is the innovation process itself that feeds that. So that's a lot of change already. So I think that's a good place to start and leave the inside out for later on, once you've gotten your feet wet with the first path.
Tim also had a second question. Looking ahead, what do you see as the future of open innovation? And are there emerging trends that you find particularly intriguing or promising?
Yes, and one of the reasons we have this new Oxford handbook coming out is that we saw that enough has happened with open innovation that it was time to gather it together in one place and create a definitive reference for people who really wanted to look into this. So this will have 57 chapters from 136 contributors, some of them from Australia, by the way. And so it's a great place to dig in. And it will be out, I think, in March or April of this next year. In terms of trends that I'm seeing that I'm excited about, one is that it turns out one of the hard things about open innovation is to deal with your own internal organization. Working with outside organizations and collaborating with them actually puts strain and stress on internal parts of your organization. And in some ways, this is the more subtle and harder part of making it work. So I think that people are starting to think more clearly about how to support the organization and prepare the internal organization for the opportunities and the stresses of doing this more collaborative approach.
Tom's question. He is the founder of a startup, have 4 team members. What advice would you have for him in guiding his small team to build a culture and focus that embraces open innovation in everyday execution?
Oh, what a wonderful question. The good news in part is I think most startups are pretty open in the beginning stages of their life because they don't really have a prior history or legacy to protect or control. They're trying to build a legacy that they can be proud of in the future. So I think the startups have a natural affinity toward this openness. But I think something that's important for startups with open innovation is you don't want the corporations to steal your ideas. So I advise startups to create a public, shareable version of what you're doing that gets people excited, but keep a piece of how you're doing that, keep that private. And anybody that wants to understand that is going to have to execute a non-disclosure agreement and is going to have to allow you to protect that before it's shared. So have a shareable version that you can share publicly with everybody. And then when somebody looks really interested and potentially is going to invest or partner with you or maybe become your customer, then and only then have this more private version that is shared very carefully and selectively. So you want to train all 14 of the team to think this way. Both public and private.
Now, Ben had a bit of a similar question, but you might have a little bit more to add from more of the, ground up startup part. Ben asked, can startups start open innovation or must it always be a large corporate? Do you have anything to add to what you've just talked about into that question, or do you feel like you've answered that question for Ben at the same time?
Well, I do think startups can start open innovation themselves. Particularly if they're working in areas that are not heavily congested with large companies already. So if you're doing something new and different, and it solves a real problem for at least some people, I think you do have an opportunity to get going, and then you can do so in ways that are more open. I think it was I'm trying to remember exactly when this happened, but when Tesla was pretty early in its development as an electronic vehicle company, they opened up their charging stations and said they would not enforce any of their patents against anybody else. So they recognized pretty early on that it was a mistake to try to be too protective of the charging network, that it was in their interest to have a broad, usable charging network by everybody, rather than having my chargers and your charging network and somebody else's charging network, and the EV owners really unsure of where to go to get their cars charged. So that's at least one example of what was a pretty young company at the time doing something pretty openly.
The next question, where are we? What are the right rewards and incentives to put in place to engage, external parties into open innovation? But I mean, that can kind of also work internal as well, especially if there's, people within the company that might also have great ideas.
Well, Sarah, that you're right to add the internal as well. There's a lot of experience now on how to engage and motivate external contributors. So depending on what you're trying to do, we can help you understand what other companies have done in similar cases in the past. So you don't have to repeat their mistakes. You can make new mistakes by learning on what they've done. As I was alluding to before, and as your addition to the question indicates, don't forget the people inside, because it does change. Often it changes what they do and how they do it. So if you do have a success with a collaboration with one or more external partners or collaborators, by all means, acknowledge them, recognize them, celebrate them, but make a point of reaching into your own organization and finding and acknowledging some of the people who made it happen inside as well. So instead of them feeling resentment that all the attention and glory is being given to people outside, they feel that they were a part of it and they are recognized as being a part of it.
I hope that covered all parts of the two questions beforehand. Earlier, you showed some, and made like some great pictures and examples of what had worked in the past. Are there any particular examples that come to mind now that, worked really well, or parts that went wrong, just so that it might be able to spur some thoughts for others that are starting in this area to keep in mind or to look out for, or anything like that?
Well, one of the reasons I wanted to share the FC Barca case study is I think it brings these innovation questions to the domain of sport. And as we saw in that example, there are many aspects of that. There's the athletes and their own performance. There are the things that the athletes eat and drink. And all of this can be increasingly measured and digitized. And surrounding the athletes, there's the club, and surrounding the club, there are the fans and this whole ecosystem out there. And I think that we're still early in connecting what FC Barca is doing very effectively with other clubs and what they're doing effectively, and what clubs can learn from each other if with all this digital data and analysis. How are you analyzing it? What are you learning? Here's what we're doing. Here's what we're learning. And I think there's still a lot to be learned from exchanging and sharing these kinds of insights with each other.
Definitely. Now, Vicky had a question from a little earlier. She said, great presentation. Thank you so much. She also had a very similar experience with the US OC and said, don't take it personally. Her question is, when an Australian business is wanting to break into the US college market, what advice would you have on finding out what they may be receptive to in terms of their pitch? And, just mainly so they don't miss the mark and they kind of cover everything. Do you have any particular things that stand out that would be helpful?
A couple of initial thoughts. I haven't done it myself, so please take my comments with a grain of salt. Sports at the college level in the US are a major business. At Berkeley, the highest paid employee of the University of California, Berkeley. It's not the chancellor. It's not the head of the engineering department. It's not the head of the energy laboratory that's developing future energy technologies. It's our college football coach, and by a lot. And the staff of that coach are also very well paid. So the good news is these are very capable, smart people, and they're looking for an edge. So if you've really got something that can help, they have resources and they're interested. The problem is a lot of people are coming at them. So how can you get to them with something that's differentiated and better? My advice there is focus on the recent athletes that have graduated from the college, ideally in the sport that you're supporting or helping, and use those. The alumni system in the US is quite strong anyway. It's even stronger, I think, with the major sports teams. And so finding an athlete and getting them to take a look at what you're doing and somehow bringing them on board to make them part of the pitch. If you can convince them, I think they can help you go a long way to convincing the coaching staff and the people with the purse strings in those college sports organizations.
Now we'll do one last question. I will mold Scott's and Margaret's question in.
And Martin has just said that ASTN can help. I saw that in the chat.
Perfect. Scott and Margaret's question, I'll kind of mold a little bit together. It will be our last question in this particular chat session. Understand, though, that you will be able to contact Henry directly if you need your question answered. Now, Margaret asks, do you have any insights for public organisations responsible for building and catalysing open innovation clusters at state and national level? And Scott was also asking about your thoughts on how you can get government support in open innovation. I'm not sure if that can kind of mold in together.
Yes, and this is an area where there's some very good academic research going on right now. So it's not the first time these questions have been asked. I would say that, thinking about policy in Australia versus policy in Europe, policy in the US, even California within the US, the contexts are different. And so I think the things that would work well with open innovation might change in those areas. Australia, I think, has the virtue of, because it is more geographically contained, I think people know each other more, and you have more opportunity to interact with each other. And that sharing of knowledge can be very productive in open innovation. But you not only need proximity, you also need the mindset that says, we might be able to do more together than either of us can do on our own. And that takes some work to get to that mindset. I know Martin is going to talk about some of the work he's done with organizations in Australia like the Renegades, and it takes time to activate that mindset and get people thinking in a way where we're not simply limited by what we already know. We're not limited by the resources we already have. Instead, we might be able to do more if we're willing to engage and we're willing to share and we're willing to collaborate. So those are, I think, the policy things. On the government side, I think the antitrust rules often are very suspicious of organizations collaborating. And I would guess the message of open innovation is we need strong antitrust protection, but a lot of the collaboration that goes on with companies is pro-social. It's good for the society. And so don't be too quick to shut that down. Instead, find ways to support it. In many cases, there are government databases that could actually contribute to the collaborating. So opening up access to those government databases for more organizations to use could be an example of a very positive step that governments can do.
Well, thank you so much, Henry. That will be the end of our first Q&A session. Thank you so much for everyone getting involved and putting your questions, in the Q&A chat box. So if you're wanting to ask a question, put it in the Q&A chat box. A couple of questions have come through the webinar chat. That's okay. But just for the remainder of today's webinar, let's try and put them in the Q&A section, and then I can get to them as quickly as possible. But thank you so much for that, Henry. You will be sticking with us because our panel discussion is coming up next.